Okay, welcome to our quick lecture on life and world on the home front during World War II. Please go ahead and take notes as we're watching, and then after this you'll be reading an article about experiences in Japanese American internment camps that you'll need to read and take some notes over. So, just to do a little bit of a refresher about World War II, World War II is really the very definition of total war. And total war is war that involves all aspects of a country, not just the military or not just even the economy, but really, literally, every person is in some way kind of metaphorically, if not literally, fighting the war. And so, when we're talking about the home front, really we're talking about here in the USA. Okay, so we're talking about what's going on in the US itself, not soldiers' experiences or anything like that. And again, with the refresher, when we're talking about gender roles before World War II, in that ideal kind of middle class or upper class situation, the men are leaving the home to earn money, and women are staying home and taking care of kids and dealing with kind of everything that's going on at or around the home. And we're talking about lower class folks, so poorer folks. Both the men and the women work, but they're striving for that middle class ideal. Okay, and women are working largely in fields as things like domestics or things like that, where it's less desirable kind of jobs. So World War II starts, and men enlist in the military largely wholesale. That's to say, pretty much any man who could get into the military did, not entirely, but by and large, either through the draft or just through going in and volunteering in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor. And what that does for the home front is that leaves a whole bunch of jobs and things that need to be done. And remember, when we were watching America, the Story of Us, a big piece of that was gearing up industry in the aftermath of the Great Depression and retooling industry so that we could use it to help out the war effort. And so these industries now are bereft of the men. The men are not there to go in and build the planes and make the Jeeps and things like that. And the way that we fill that gap is largely with women. And so what they do is they go out and they recruit women to fill these roles, which in many ways reverses those previous gender roles. So now women are outside of the house, they're working in the factories, they have more freedom, right? Women in the countryside are moving into the cities, and all kinds of crazy things like that. And you see all kinds of propaganda posters and things like that, like the one on the screen or the one on the previous screen, encouraging women to come in and work in the factories. So just to give you some idea locally what impact that had, Boeing had somewhere around 90% of its employees were women during World War II, putting together and building planes. Okay. When we're talking about race during World War II, remember, even in the North, segregation is still the norm. So in the South, it's by law. Right? There are places where African Americans are simply not allowed to go, as well as by custom. So there's ways in which they are, for lack of a better term, strongly discouraged from acting. But up north, it's really more by custom. So it's just that there are neighborhoods that are white and there are neighborhoods that are black, right? Not so much that blacks can't go into white neighborhoods, just that it's strongly discouraged. What happens during World War II is we start to see that kind of turn on its head. So the armed forces become integrated. So now we've got blacks and whites fighting alongside each other. Okay. Interesting to note that this doesn't extend to all ethnic groups. So for instance, Japanese Americans had their own separate battalions and things. And what that means as well is that those African Americans who maybe can't or won't go into the military, and certainly you see a little bit of each. They are moving up north, and remember we talked about with the Harlem Renaissance, that Great Migration, those folks moving north, that continues, and people are moving not just to the north, but they're also moving to the west. And they're doing this to take advantage of these jobs that are available. So not only are we adding women into the factories and into those higher paid jobs in the factories, we're also adding blacks in a way that really previously hadn't been done. And then also back to the military, as African Americans are, as they're abroad and as they're seeing and being treated in new and different ways, largely significantly more equal ways, what that does is create this mindset of, well, wait a minute, we're fighting for democracy, but we're not really getting democracy back home. And we're not really getting treated the way we should be treated back home. Because, I mean, look at how these French folks treat us, or how these Italian folks treat us. So they're treated significantly better than they would get treated back home. And that really kind of starts to flip a switch in terms of what they're entitled to and what they deserve. Okay. Japanese Americans are a special case during World War II, and this is largely because unlike really in any previous war, what we do is we round up Japanese Americans and we put them in internment camps. And you're going to read an article about this, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but you should just know that it is primarily, not entirely, but primarily Japanese Americans. And that when we're talking about Germans or even Italians, what we're talking about are people who were resisting the war in some way. Okay, with Japanese Americans, it literally, as the poster there says, it's literally everybody of Japanese ancestry. So it doesn't matter if you're a citizen, it doesn't matter if you've lived here for 30, 40, 50 years, does not matter. If you were born here, you are going to a camp. Okay, here locally, by the way, the order to send folks to camp, that was an executive order. It wasn't passed by Congress. So this is not Eisenhower, sorry. This is Roosevelt saying we need to round folks up. Okay, and it's Executive Order 9066. Here locally, what we do is we send them to a place that we euphemistically call Camp Harmony. You guys call it the Puyallup Fairgrounds over in Puyallup, and what they do is they take all of the buildings out there and literally stick people in every building they can, and they build some extra buildings as needed. So think about maybe you and your family having to live in a horse stall, or actually for most of you gentlemen, you'd be old enough that you'd probably be housed in a separate male-only barracks. For you ladies, potentially you might be in a female-only barracks. And just having to do the best you can to make it home, even if you're sharing a room with, say, 200 of your new best friends. And by and large, people do that as best they can. And they're at Camp Harmony for anywhere from 6 months to a year, just depending on who exactly we're talking about. And then they're moved further inland. And that 6 months to a year is the length of time it takes to actually build the internment camps. And the folks from Washington State went largely to Minidoka in Idaho. Okay, and these internment camps, by the way, they're taking people from the coastal areas and they're moving them inland. So you see them in Idaho, in Utah. Some of them are as far east as Arkansas. But really the goal is to get people away from the West Coast. Okay, and much like in Camp Harmony and Puyallup, in Minidoka, people make it home. But the difference is here, home is no longer like a horse stall, or we're not living in giant male-only barracks by and large. What we're doing is living as best we can in family groups. So imagine you and your family getting a room that's probably no more than 20 by 20 feet, single room, okay, no plumbing inside. So you've got to walk out to go do your laundry. You've got to walk out even to go to the bathroom. Okay. And the best you can do in terms of splitting this space up is doing things like hanging sheets up. You're not allowed to take any furniture with you, so you've got to build what furniture you can, or you've got to order it mail order. Okay, literally you're allowed to take one suitcase. So stop and think, what would I bring in with my one suitcase? And people are looking at things like bringing in their clothes, right? Maybe some food. You're not allowed any of your electronics. All of that has to stay home. And so you're basically bringing what linens you can and what clothes you can and personal care items. And then you're having to figure out the rest. And one of the things that they do once they get people, especially into the permanent camps, is they give them jobs and things like that. So there are ways to earn money in the camps, and they set up schools and things like that. But it's not the same. Okay, it's not the same as being outside. So even though technically these are folks who are not, and I use the term camp because even though they looked like jails and they functioned in many ways like jails, these are not folks who were ever convicted of a crime. And these are not folks who had committed any crime by and large. Okay. Within the internment camps, and even really before internment, you do see some forms of resistance. Things like refusing to go in after curfew, right? And there was a curfew imposed on the West Coast, in particular for folks of Japanese ancestry. And that was kind of one of the more famous ones. Once we get people in the camps themselves, then we start to see folks resisting in different ways. And really it just kind of depends on what your mentality is. Okay, so we see one of the things that's required in the camps is the signing of a loyalty oath. So we see folks who flat out say, you know what, I don't know the Japanese emperor, I've never been to Japan, I have no loyalty to him, but that's not the point. The point is you're not asking those white guys over there who are German to forswear their loyalty. Okay, so I'm going to say, no, I'm not willing to forswear loyalty. And we call the groups that do that, we call those, largely they're male, the no-no boys, and they actually get put into prison camps because of their refusal to sign this oath. You see other folks who resist by saying, we are going to show the white folks that we are more American than they are. And so you see folks who join the military. And really the Japanese battalions are the most decorated during World War II. Okay, so these are hardcore folks. And you also see folks who resist by doing the best they can to try and get out of the camps. And to some degree, the camps are they're always envisioned as being a temporary solution. And the idea is to move people from the west and get them away from the coast and potentially move them a little more east. So to get out of the camps, you have to get somebody to sponsor you. You have to have a job, a place to live. Okay, and these are not insurmountable obstacles. Okay, and people did do that, and so they kind of trickle out of the camps that way. And you also just see people who are literally resisting by doing the best they can to make the best out of a bad situation. When we're talking about the home front, really as well, we're talking about rationing. So you're only allowed a certain amount of food, okay, or a certain amount of various other things, and we do this to save for the troops and also for the war industries, right? And people are encouraged to grow their own food. So somewhere I was just reading a statistic that something along the lines of 60% of fruits and vegetables eaten during World War II were grown in people's backyards. Okay, so stop and think about that. If you had to grow your own food, not chose to, but had to grow your own food. In terms of long-term effects of what's going on in the home front on World War II, we talk about it leading to the feminist revolution in the 1960s and 70s, right? As women get that taste of freedom from working in the factories and not having that constant supervision. Okay, after World War II, they're forced back into homes. Forced is a bit strong of a term, but you get the idea. And so leads to some discontent that way. And again, also when we're talking about African Americans in particular, the different ways they're treated abroad just change that mentality to we should really be treated better at home, and creates that willingness to fight for what they believe is their right. Thank you for joining me. It's been a pleasure lecturing. Do not forget that you need to read the article as well and take notes over it, and there will be a quiz when I see you next week. Enjoy your weekend.